Hello everyone, this is a test review for the first major exam, History 1302. Let's start then with a little bit of preliminaries. For this test you will need a blue book, a picture of that is up there on the right side of the slide, and a Scantron. Blue books are available over in the bookstore. You can get them anywhere. They're like 50 cents a piece. We used to supply those at where I teach, but we don't do that anymore. So go get a blue book. While you're there at the bookstore, just get three. You're going to need one for the first midterm, second midterm, and the final. You're going to need all three. You're also going to need a Scantron for the multiple choice portion. All right? Just get the little narrow one that you see here. Don't get the one that has like a booklet sort of thing. Don't get that, because you're going to be tempted to put your essay into the booklet, and there's just not enough space there. So just get the little narrow one, the one that you see there. You can get them individually. They're like 15 cents a piece. Or you can get a little package. It's got like 7 in there, and that's actually cheaper. Okay? So for the test, you will need a Scantron and Blue Book. Now let's start then with the test format. You will be presented with 20 multiple choice questions. Everything that we've talked about in class up to from Reconstruction right the way through to the end of the First World War, those are testable. But please understand, I'm only going to be looking for the major issues. As we go through the rest of the review, you'll have a really good idea of kind of the major questions that I might be asking on the multiple choice questions. However, and I have it up there, a hint, if it's in the text, and if you haven't read the text, you're in trouble now. You got to go back and read it. If it's in the text and it's in your classroom notes, if it's in the notes that you took from the online material, then that's a good candidate for a multiple choice question. Again, it's going to be the major issues. For example, what was Lincoln's wife's name? Her name was Mary Todd, but that's not going to be a multiple choice question. What was Lincoln's idea for Reconstruction? The 10% plan. Well, that's, that can easily be a multiple choice question. But as we go through the rest of the review, you'll pick up from what I'm talking about kind of what to look for in terms of multiple choice questions. So on the test day, listen to me carefully on this. Don't get hung up on the multiple choice. They are worth 2 points each. There are 20 of them. 2 points each, that's 40 points. So give them 2 points worth of your time, but no more than that. If you absolutely don't know the answer, make a guess and move on. Don't get hung up on the multiple choice. It's just, they're not worth it, okay? They're only worth 2 points each. Now, having said that, if you miss 5 of these, you're down to a B and you haven't even taken the major part of the test yet. So give them their attention that they deserve, but don't get hung up, because the points are in the essay, and the essay takes forever to do. If you're looking at the clock and you've spent more than about 15 minutes on the multiple choice, stop what you're doing, finish it up, and get on with the essay. On the essay, you'll be presented with 4, maybe 5 questions. You choose one. One essay at 60 points. You choose one. As we go through the rest of this presentation, you'll have a good idea of what the essay questions might be. Your essay will be written in the blue book, and so I urge you all, you're not required to do this, it's not gradable, but I urge you all to consider a quick outline. Do a bubble type. It's just brainstorming. A bubble in the middle, put it on the inside cover of your blue book. Don't bring a loaded blue book, that's cheating. But this is what you need to remember. And then when you get your blue book and the test in front of you, start with a bubble outline. Just draw sort of a circle, a bubble. That's your major idea with your thesis statement. Then paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, with different bubbles. And then the ideas that goes into those bubbles. Then number them. Here's bubble number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many you're going to have. And then continue to refer to your outline as you do the test. The outline is not gradable, but if you do a good outline, then your essay is going to flow well. It's going to be really thorough, and it's going to aid you in getting the writing done. But here's what you need for the essay. I need an intro paragraph, Tell me what you're telling me. Be brief. You don't have time for this. You don't have time for any, long-winded allocation. All I'm really looking for is a thesis statement and a list of major topics. That's all your intro needs. A thesis statement and a major topic. Here's my thesis statement, blah, 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 blah. Here's the major things I'm going to say. No, 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 no. Put a period at the end of it. Your intro is done. Then tell me what you're going to tell me. Then tell me, okay, so 3 to 50 body paragraphs. Be thorough and direct. I'm only looking, listen to me carefully, ladies and gentlemen, I'm only looking for facts and analysis. That's it. I want facts and analysis. What are the facts? What do the facts mean? Be direct and thorough. Do not get bogged down in storytelling. Get straight to it. What are the major issues involved in the topic that you select? Again, you'll know more about that in a minute. Then, again, by this time you're probably keeping an eye on the clock. Give me a conclusion. All you got to do is say, listen, here was the big issue that I wanted to tell you. Here's my thesis statement, and here are the big issues that I wrote about. Put a period at the end of it. A conclusion should have a relationship with your intro paragraph. Finally, you are not graded on structure or grammar, only content. So I'm not looking for any kind of footnotes or any of that other nonsense. Think of this as a rough draft of a major paper. So, in other words, if you're trying to think of some big, phrase that you can't think of somebody's name or something like that, just get as close as you can. You're not going to be counted off for spelling. When I get your blue book, I will certainly circle phrases that you've misspelled because, I want to try and correct your task for you. That's part of it. But you're only really graded on content. What are the facts? What do the facts mean? That's what I want. Yes? That's what we're looking for. What are the facts? What do the facts mean? So, our names, are they important? Yes, they are, because they're good facts. Are dates important? Use that circa thing. We talked about that in class. Unless it's a date that I told you had to remember, plus or minus 10 years is fine. C dot and then the date. It's right around this date, okay? But if it's a date that I told you had to know, well, you got to put that date in there because they're good, hard facts. As many dates as you can put in, put those in. So with that in mind, then, that's the test format. 20 multiple choice questions, 4 essays, you choose one. Do not think you're going to do 2 of these essays and do a bad job on them and get more points because you did the second essay. Nope. Only 1 essay will be graded. So please follow your instructions. Now your instructions on the essay will say, tell me everything you know on the topic that you select. So I get the question, how long does it have to be? Tell me everything you know on the topic that you select. Keep going. That's how long it has to be. 3 to 50 body paragraphs, not a typo. I'm trying to urge you to write as much as you know on the topic that you select. So please do that. So with that in mind, let's head into the material that we discussed in class or that you should have watched online. The first thing we talked about was Reconstruction. Our thesis statement is Reconstruction was a failure. And then I built a case. The first major event that we talked about was President Lincoln. Now, I went through the Constitution fairly thoroughly on this. How did it affect Reconstruction? So if you see a question, an essay question on Reconstruction, and you choose to do it, then you have to include elements of the Constitution. It's not important that you should recite the Constitution in your essay. I don't expect that. But at least know the paragraphs. Please know the sections that are important. Article 1, Section 10. Article 1, Section 8. Article 6, Paragraph 2. The 10th Amendment. I talked about that. So the 10% plan, be prepared to describe it. This is what Lincoln was thinking. This is how he came up with it. This is what happened. What are the facts? What is the analysis? Bear in mind that with the 10% plan, that's 10% of the voting population in the 1860 election. That's not 10% of the overall population. Now that sounds like a multiple choice question to me right there. In other words, the 10% plan, 10% of who? What 10% is this? And you got to be able to know which, what the 10%, what that means. 3 states were in fact reconstructed under the 10% plan. And that's Arkansas, Tennessee, and Louisiana. Again, sounds like a multiple choice question. But then Lincoln was shot. Don't get bogged down in that. If you find an essay and you choose to do this, don't get bogged down in the assassination. That's not part of Reconstruction. But it does lead to Johnson. Talk about his political strength. He has no constituency. What is his plan? It's part 10% of what Wade and part Wade Davis. Facts and analysis. Then Johnson is impeached, but he's not removed. Again, is that a multiple choice question? Possibly. But then I talked about Wade Davis, and you should have a whole page of notes on just Wade Davis. So if you see an essay question on Reconstruction and you choose to write about it, be prepared to talk about Wade Davis. What are the facts surrounding Wade Davis? What comprises Wade Davis? And what does it mean? Lincoln had to pocket veto Wade Davis, but it comes back later on when Congress gets control of Reconstruction. Now, congressional Reconstruction almost immediately turns to military Reconstruction. Why is that? Black coats and Jim Crow laws. Be prepared to talk about that. The rise of the Klan. Be prepared to talk about that. Talk about the constitutionality of military Reconstruction. How, what are the mechanisms behind it? 5 military districts, each governed or supervised by a serious general, a general who was very important during the Civil War. I gave you Texas as an example. So then Johnson is out and Grant is in. And so talk about Grant. How did he approach Reconstruction? He let Congress handle it, but he did suggest that he wanted fewer troops in the South. But then what did he say to the troops? You find the Klan, you hunt them down. That's what you do. Finally, you get to the Hayes-Tilden election in 1876. This is the end of the Grant administration, and so you have an open election. Hayes is going to be on the Republican side. Samuel Tilden is going to be on the Democratic side. There's a tie in the Electoral College, and that is going to be solved with the Compromise of 1877. And so the Compromise of 1877, be prepared to talk about the elements of it. What comprises the Compromise of 1877? Again, that looks like a multiple choice question to me. And so Reconstruction ended artificially. If you see an essay question on this and you choose to write about it, you really need to put that phrase in there. I think I was jumping up and down on the online portion when I recorded that part. Reconstruction ends artificially with the Compromise of 1877. Then I gave you a few brief notes on the aftermath. How did the North feel? They were excited about what was going on in the West. They were like, listen, we won and you fools lost. Get over it. That's really the attitude of the North even to this day. But the South, there was a lot of bitterness, and they took all that bitterness out on African Americans, which would be important later. Those Jim Crow laws and black codes, they remain. Nationally, we want to head out to the West. We want to get involved in all these gold rushes and silver rushes. We want to deal with the Native Americans. So Reconstruction was a success or a failure. Tell me what the facts are and what the analysis is. If you see an essay question on this, you choose to do it. But under any circumstances, be prepared for several multiple choice questions on this topic. All right, so the next issue that we talked about was Western migration. Western migration. Again, our thesis statement is Western migration is a major event in American history. And I talked about that significantly. Frederick Jackson Turner. So the first thing that you have to deal with in Western expansion is you have to deal with the Native American, the population group, their constitutional position, how many there were, where are they at? Again, I talked about, these sophisticated tribes. They had everything that was associated with civilization except an easily transmittable form of writing. And I talked about how they had sophisticated governments and laws and religion. I also talked about, kind of at the end of that part of the discussion, I talked about the treaties of Fort Laramie and Fort Fetterman. Be prepared to talk about that. But then that led next to the Little Bighorn campaign. Again, don't get bogged down in storytelling. This is an example of what happens. In other words, that cycle of war begins, that cycle of Native American affairs. Encroachment, Native American reaction, a war breaks out, and the Native Americans are initially successful. The Americans come back with teamwork and technology. Teamwork allows them to fight in the winter. Technology is guns. They wipe out the Indians and grab the land, and the cycle starts again. So that's the Little Bighorn campaign in 1876. They broke the treaties. Sitting Bull left the reservation. There was a fight, the Little Bighorn fight, and the Native Americans won. But then the Americans are going to go crazy over this. I talked about that a lot. And they're going to wipe out the Native Americans. The pattern was, if the Native Americans resisted, they got a bad treaty. If they cooperated, they got a good treaty. And with the Dawes-Severly Act. Again, this, I talked about this extensively, and it rises to the level of multiple choice question. We take these Native American children and force them to go this forced assimilation. We force them to go the white man's way. Stick them into, kidnap them, put them in schools in the East, force them to only speak English, force them into Christianity. But the other part of the Dawes-Severly Act is to take the land, divide all the land up, give it to individual Native Americans with a little deed and title. Then later on, make a deal with them. You give me the deed and title, and I'll give you something that you can survive on. And that is a mechanism to take the land. So be prepared to talk about the Dawes-Severly Act. So once the Native Americans are dealt with, then you can talk about actual westward expansion. Who goes west, why they go west, how they go west. This is very direct. It's very linear. We talk about immigrants going into the West. They break up into two groups, internal immigrants or external immigrants. Let us say immigrants from within the United States or true immigrants from outside the United States. I give you many, many examples of both of those. I talked about why people go to the West. Some of this was intermixed with one another. They're just too close to like really separate. But gold rush after gold rush after gold rush, silver rush after silver rush, copper rushes. Then I talked about land rushes. Think about the Homestead Act of 1862. Another major motive is escape. Then there's just this urge to move, a real or perceived opportunity. So be prepared to talk about why. What is motivating people to go to the West? Then I'll talk about how they go west. There are three mechanisms, wagon, rail, and ships, and there are pros and cons of each. Be prepared to talk about that. Remember that if you talk about railroads going west, that is date sensitive. As you're listening to this, please kind of write that down or write down a mental note. Going to the West by rail, May 1869. That is date sensitive. If you see an essay on westward expansion and you choose to do it, you make sure you get that date in there. But again, Dawes-Severly Act, motives to go west, various immigrant groups that go west, all that adds up to multiple choice questions as well. So be prepared for that. So the next major issue that we did talk about was progressivism. So the progressive era. Now this is complex, so you have to make sure that you break this down to the simple. So our thesis statement is the law must catch up with industrialization. It's the second industrial revolution. Agriculture, we're putting all the guys that work in agriculture, all the farmers, we're putting them under pressure. All the people that work in industry, we're putting them under pressure. We're putting everybody under pressure, which I see the misspelling now, but it's too late to go back now. Just put up with it. How are the farmers under pressure? They're working, and they're making no money. The workers in industry, they're working, and they're basically economic slaves. I talked about that. So in our system, if we want change, we should be able to reach out to our politicians and make them do a change. But it turns out in the era that we're talking about, the politicians are in it for themselves. And again, this is a matter of pressure. I gave you an example, which is Tammany Hall. And so be prepared to talk about that. And Tammany Hall and what's the guy associated with Tammany Hall? I can't remember his name. Anyway, be prepared to talk about it. Then I talk about the economics, the haves versus the have-nots. I talked about laissez-faire economic policy. There were two problems with it, which sounds like an economic multiple choice question to me. When we talk about laissez-faire, the two problems are the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and the money gets trapped at the top. Then that leads to a boom and bust economy. Those are the two problems. The money gets trapped at the top and a boom and bust economy. Laissez-faire economics. Then I talked about some of the rich, the personalities. I talked about Carnegie. I talked about him. I talked about Rockefeller. I talked about some of these other rich individuals. Take a look at those guys. So the idea is money's being made, but it's just not getting down. It's not filtering down in the economy. So the result is trust busting, and this leads to the Sherman Antitrust Act 1890. Now, I did talk about the real dynamo of change. It's not on here, but talk about the real dynamo of change, and that's the middle class. I started out with Thomas Nast. I transitioned to L. Frank Baum. I talked about Ida Tarbell. I talked about Upton Sinclair in his book, The Jungle. I talked about half a dozen other personalities that have to do with the dynamo of change, the middle class. And then that all led to the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. So again, the progressive era, there's a lot of moving parts here, but it's also very linear. All you got to do is identify all the poor and put them all under pressure. Identify one possible solution, which is politicians, but they're in it for themselves, Tammany Hall. Talk about how the economy has an effect, laissez-faire economics. Talk about how the rich are getting very much richer, so everybody knows money's being made. The dynamo of change is the middle class. Talk about them. And then the last thing you need to talk about is the Sherman Antitrust Act 1890. And so that signifies that is the law catching up with industrialization. If you could get to the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, talk about how that catches the law up with industrialization, put a period at the end of it, and get on with your life. You're done. Okay? Having said that, if you see an essay question on the progressive era and choose to do it, that's what you need to do. But every one of these major issues rises to the level of a multiple choice question. The names of the rich, ideas about laissez-faire economic policy, the Sherman Antitrust of 1890, that's almost certainly a multiple choice question. So be prepared for that. Another issue that we did talk about was American imperialism. So our thesis statement is Americans are very bad imperialists. We started out with McKinley and the Spanish-American War, 1898. I talked about what Frederick Jackson Turner suggested, that the frontier was closed, but we wanted to expand outside of our frontiers with ideas and ideals. And so the Spanish-American War was an excellent mechanism for that. Why the Spanish-American War? I talked about yellow journalism, conditions in Cuba, the destruction of the battleship Maine. So then I showed you, the first thing I showed you is what we got and how we got it. Our gains are empire. What did we get out of the Spanish-American War, 1898? Empire. Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Pacific Islands. Then I talked about examples. Banana republics, I talked about that. And that turns out to be really bad. Strategic islands, especially Hawaii, I talked about that. And that turned out to be really bad. The Panama Canal, what a great idea. Put the canal in. And we did put the canal in, but there were lots of bad things that happened along the way. And so be prepared to talk about that. So banana republics, the Panama Canal, Hawaii, those are good examples of how we are really, really bad at imperialism. So by 1913, we are isolationist. We are isolationist. Now, please bear in mind, and you'll see that I have the little paragraph indicator. That's different. Wilson in World War I, That is not part of American imperialism. But you need to know about the underlying causes of the First World War and America's role in the First World War, because you're going to need to know that later. So if you did not watch that slide, it takes about an hour and a half. That presentation, it takes about an hour and a half, but make sure you watch it. But Wilson and World War I are not American imperialism. Just make sure you know about it. Last but not least, we also talked about some Supreme Court cases, and I talked about the presidents. So presidents and Supreme Court cases, this was to me, it seemed very difficult to find a meaningful essay question here. So all of this might rise to the level of multiple choice questions on a major exam. I talked about Grover Cleveland and how you need to think of him as transitional. William McKinley, a progressive, and he's all about beginning trust busting. Theodore Roosevelt, he continues on with his populism and progressivism. Your book talks about that a lot. He's an extremely active president. Last, I talked about William Howard Taft. He's transitional. He begins as a progressive, and he continues on with trust busting, but then he switches to conservatism, and he takes the Republican Party with him. I also talked about two major court cases. In terms of a multiple choice question, be sure that you know what the court case was about and what the outcome was. That's what a multiple choice question would look like. So Plessy v. Ferguson, here are all these Jim Crow laws and black codes. Homer Plessy he breaks the law in order to initiate a court case in order to challenge them. It goes through the normal court hierarchy and gets to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court made a bad decision in Plessy. They made a bad decision. They said, we don't want to refight the Civil War. So they said, you know what? States' rights. The states have a right to do that. They have a right to put in those black codes. They can govern themselves in this. But the dissenting opinion was John Marshall Harlan. And that's the important part about it. What did he say? He said all these Jim Crow laws and black codes, they are a mark of servitude. They are antithetical to the Constitution. And he was right. I talked about the Wong Kim Ark case. And this challenged the Chinese Exclusion Act. The idea here, and with Plessy, we cannot identify a minority group and put them under a special legal constraint. That is unconstitutional. But different political organizations, conservatives, I'm sorry to say, they wanted that. They insisted upon that. And so they made the Chinese Exclusion Act 1882. Again, this goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And Wong Kim Ark and his lawyers will use the 14th Amendment, which was understood to be trying to protect former slaves in the South. But he uses it and says, listen, I was born in America. That makes me a citizen of the United States, and I cannot be negatively impacted by the Chinese Exclusion Act. And so the Supreme Court said, you know what? You're right. You are a citizen of the United States, and the Chinese Exclusion Act does not apply to you. But they did not overturn the law, which continually allowed California primarily unconstitutionally to identify people from Asia as a minority group and maltreat them. And that was unconstitutional. So be prepared to talk about that. That could rise to the level of, all of the things that you see on this slide could rise to the level of a multiple choice question. So hopefully this review has helped you. I know I made a few verbal mistakes when I was going over this, but I'm trying to get this thing up and online as fast as ever I can. If you have not watched the videos that are online, please do so immediately. So thank you for your time, and good luck on the test. I will see you in class.